to introduce you, talk about your staff, and kind of go through your members?
Yeah, sure. My name is Eddie Pinner. I am the senior economist with the Kansas Legislative Research Department. This is my my first year with this committee, but I have been staffing the Senate Commerce Committee now for the last 6 years. So the kind of a crossover into the House this year. And I'll let Eric Adele from our office introduce himself as well. But might note for Eric that he's muted.
Eric, you're on mute.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Yeah. I'm Eric Adele. This is my first session with KLRD, and before this I was an analyst at Department of Labor. So.
Thank you. Charles Reimer, are you with us? Okay, it looks like we're missing Charles for now. If he gets on a little bit, we'll have him introduce himself. I know he may not be feeling well, and he might not make it. So if he ends up being here, if not, we'll introduce him tomorrow. So we'll start with Representative Long and go around the room to just give a brief background of yourself so the other committee members can kind of get your background. I've met with some of the newer members, and they've got some impressive things to bring to the table. So, Representative Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a privilege to serve on this committee. This is my second term. We're all glad to be here and hope this committee accomplishes a lot of great things this year. My name is Representative Long. I'm in the 124th District in the southwest corner of the state. I've farmed for 42 years. And I'm also own a couple of small businesses, so this committee means the world to me. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative Highland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I grew up in Northwest Kansas, but now live just south of Wamego, 51st District, from the dam down to almost Emporia, 5 counties. Background, veterinarian. Drug development for the most of my career, and retired, and now here. This is my 9th year.
Thank you, Representative Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Les Mason from McPherson County. I live in the city of McPherson and represent the 73rd District. I've been in the legislature about 7 years, and having been a small business owner for 27 years. Again, commerce is a very important topic for me.
Thank you, Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kyle Hoffman. I represent the 116th District, which is Comanche, Barber, Harper, and Sumner counties down south central Kansas. This is my 11th year. I'm a farm and rancher, but I've also owned a couple of different businesses, a internet business and a gas and service station over the years. So this is my second term to be on this committee, and I'm excited to once again be on it. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Christy Williams, and I live in Augusta. It's 10 miles east of Wichita. I'm married, mother of 4. This is my 4th term in the legislature, and I believe it's my third term in commerce. I also have a business background with my husband, and that would include hospitality, insurance, and manufacturing, and real estate. But I come from an education background and was a former teacher, mayor, and am the K-12 budget chair. But I believe that schools and our economy are interlocked. And when schools are open, businesses are open, and together they can support each other. And so I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Representative Burrows, are you with us? No. Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Vic Miller. I represent the 58th District, which if you open the blinds, you can see across 12th Street, running out to Lake Shawnee. I have the distinction of being a 3-time freshman House member. I was held back the last 2 years. I also now have the distinction of being the Dean of the Kansas Legislature with the departure of Senator Hensley, having first served in the Kansas House in 1979. I'm a lot older than what I appear to be, just so you know. I grew up on a farm close to where Representative our camp lives, one of 7 children. We had no indoor plumbing in my house until I was 12 years old. I attended a 1-room schoolhouse for the first 7 years of my education. I became the state spelling champ. I speak 5 different languages fluently, graduated first in my law school class, and I've been told it's almost impossible to know when I'm lying and when I'm not. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Miller, and welcome to committee. It's going to be, we also do have a good time in here, so we'll go across the back there with Representative Hsu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Hsu, just like it's spelled, obviously. I represent House District 25 in Northeast Johnson County. I grew up in Rolla, Missouri. I studied economics, so I've actually spent a lot of my 20s trying to figure out what it would take me to move back to Rolla, Missouri, which I think the answer to that question solves a lot of issues that Kansas has. I've also spent a lot of my 20s thinking about incentive structures and innovation, so I'm really excited to be part of this committee. Thank you for having me.
Yes, and welcome to committee. Rep. Borjan.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jesse Borjan, representing the 52nd House District. That's here in southwest Shawnee County. I am a small business owner. My wife and I have a retail business here in Topeka. We also do property management. Prior to that, I served about 15 years in state government, worked 12 years at the Secretary of State's office, a short stint at KDOT, working on federal funds for the state highway program, and then 3 years at the Kansas Corporation Commission. So not only business, but some state government background as well. It's an honor to be here. My last name is Borjan. Think boring John, Borjan. So I look forward to working with all of you here on this committee.
Welcome to committee, Representative Dodson.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. 37 years in the Army. While in the Army, I was fortunate to be chairman of the Army Air Force Exchange System, so learned a little bit about business there. I had the opportunity to take care of all the installations in Europe later in my career. Went to work for Bechtel Corporation for 12 years and finished that down in Houston as president of one of their companies down there. Was on the Manhattan City Commission for 3 years and mayor for 1 year, and very glad to be here. Economic issues were something that I ran on, I believe in strongly, and I hope for a stronger Kansas. And I really appreciate being on this committee with all of you. Thanks.
Thank you, Representative. Welcome to committee. That's very impressive, and I, for one, can tell you that it's extremely nice to have someone on this committee that outranks Colonel Croft. Representative Kessler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Representative Tom Kessler. I'm from the south part of Wichita in District 96. I'm a pretty simple guy. I've been a small businessman for the last 25 plus years, and this has just been a great opportunity for me, and I really appreciate being on this committee.
Welcome to committee. Representative Anderson.
Hello. My name's Avery Anderson. I represent the 72nd District, which is majority of Harvey County and a sliver of Butler County. I graduated from the University of Kansas last December, and I help manage our family businesses back home. And I look forward to serving with you all.
Welcome to committee. I'm not sure if Representative Ralph is with us or if he's online. Not seeing anything, so we'll move on to Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Stephen Johnson, almost as easy as Shu or Borjan. And I came into the legislature with Representative Hoffman, so 11th year on that. My district is just north of Representative Mason in the rural areas of Saline County, a little bit of McPherson, then Rice and Ellsworth counties, so middle of the state area. I went to K-State undergrad, went to work with American Express, then Ameriprise and Investment Advice and Products. Couldn't either keep a job or find one, so I spent time in a lot of other states until 2008 when my second parent passed away, and I moved back to the farm. I continued to farm, and my Ameriprise efforts went down in 2013, but I still found that useful as I got the chance to work with some financial issues here in the legislature. Glad to get to join Commerce for my first time since being here. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Welcome. Representative Sutton, are you online?
I am indeed.
You're up.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, very good. I'm Representative Bill Sutton. This is my 9th session, but it's my first time on the Commerce Committee, and I'm really excited to be here. Normally, I spend all of my time on budgets, so I'm really looking forward to working on more of a policy. And I think this is going to be actually it's a perfect match. I'm coming from the 43rd district, the southwest corner of Johnson County, home of one of the biggest economic drivers currently in the state, with the intermodal facility. And I work in the supply chain line for construction and oil and gas. So I think this is going to be a really interesting committee, and I look forward to taking part in it.
Well, welcome. Let's move to Representative Auerkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Francis Auerkamp, represent the 61st District, which is most of Jackson County and the more rural part of Potawatomi County. I live in St. Mary's with my wife Shannon, our 5 children. And day job, I help run a family manufacturing business, and also have about 8 years on a city council. So looking forward to being part of your committee, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Welcome. Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Will Carpenter, representative from the 75th District, Northern Butler County, El Dorado, Cassidy, Potwin. 35 years, small business owner. Been on this committee since I came to the legislature in 2013. So looking forward to getting on with business.
Good to have you back. Representative Croft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Chris Croft. I'm a husband of 35 years, 2 children and 5 grandchildren. I obviously can't compare. I have 30 years in the Army. This is my 2nd term in the House and 2nd term on the committee. And I just have one thing, if it's okay, Mr. Chairman, for Representative Hoffman. Go Army, beat Navy.
Representative Clayton.
Like Representative Tarwater, I was on the interim committee for economic recovery, and so this is very important work that we are doing. My legislative district is in Johnson County, primarily Overland Park, Prairie Village, and Old Leawood. We do border Missouri, and so I am always very very cognizant of the fact that we just have to beat them at everything.
And welcome back. As good as our committee was last year, we really missed you. So I'm glad you're back. My name is Sean Tarwater. I've been here for 4 years. I became chair 2 years ago. I live in Stillwell, Kansas, the 27th district. I have 4 boys. I'm married, and I have a business background. I came up in insurance, doing offshore reinsurance for automotive dealers. And since then, I've owned several businesses, learned a lot, made a lot of mistakes and had a lot of successes. But I can tell you that I learned a lot more from my mistakes than I did from my successes. Successes were probably more like luck. But either way, I'm excited for this year, and we can keep going. Committee, each of you have, we are a paperless committee this year. And so most of the things you'll just download onto your laptop, or you can print them out before you come. We do have folders for you. Those of you that were on the committee last year, we have your folders still. If you're interested in them, stop by my office sometime today or tomorrow if you'd like them. If you want to keep those folders with us, we'll bring them to every meeting, so you have them if you want to refer to things from last year. We will have folders, but they'll be up to you to put things in. If you want to take notes, you can put them in your folder, and we will bring those back and forth. But you have before you a copy of the conferee rules as well as the committee rules, and we printed those out for you so you'd have them to refer to as we move on. We'll move on to requests for bill introductions. Are there any? Representative Hsu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm requesting this on behalf of Representative Heiberger, who is represented on behalf of the Kansas Commission on Disability Concerns. The RS number is 2021 RS 0148.1, and it's a disability hiring preference for state employment bill.
Without objection, we'll enter the bill. Seeing none. Any other bill introductions for today? Would Whitney Dameron be in the room or somewhere around? Guess not. We'll close bill introductions. We'll move on to the overview of the Special Committee on Economic Recovery Activities. As you all know, we had this interim committee that the leadership put together. They thought it was important that we get a jump on this session. And so we worked quite a bit, had many meetings, and we took all recommendations and wrapped them into one document. And the recommendations came from both sides of the aisle. And so some of them you may not all like, but they're all in there. That's what everybody came up with. And so we didn't leave anything out. And I'll turn it over to Eddie Pinner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm going to attempt to share my screen in hopes that the document that you all hopefully have received is what should appear on the screen for the meeting. Is that a PDF pop up in there in the room, it looks like? Okay, believing that it did, I'm just going to jump right into it. The first thing that I do want to note is that, as you can see, based upon the watermark, this is still a draft report and has not yet been formally approved by the special committee. That approval is pending this Friday at the close of business. so far I have not heard any response back indicating that anything needs changed. And so I am kind of anticipating that it will be approved. But I just want to walk through the report. And obviously, as a heads up for this committee, it's obviously very easy to see the economic challenges that have been experienced by the nation, and all of your constituents as well. And in response to those economic challenges, the LCC created this special committee, and the special committee was tasked to review state policies and make recommendations to the legislature concerning economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic in the areas of taxation, regulatory affairs, business financing, and programs at the Kansas Department of Labor and Kansas Department of Commerce. As background from that, whereas further explanation of that, I do want to give a little bit of an overview of how the committee worked. There were originally 6 days approved for this committee. However, the committee was, and actually I am going to make a slight change here and change which document I am sharing screens from, because this one is not, in fact, the correct document. So if you'll give me just a minute, I had a different version of this open as well. There, now it should be showing the correct one. The 6 days approved, 3 more were later added by the LCC. The committee only wound up actually using 8 of those days, and that use was in the form of 4 two-day meetings spread across, one in August, one in September, one in November, and one in December. As a kind of a item to note in advance of this, the chair attempted to structure these meetings in kind of an order that would make a little bit of sense. But of course, anytime you're scheduling interim committee meetings, you also have to schedule based upon availability. So the August and September meetings were largely oriented towards surveying the state of the Kansas economy by reaching out to and discussing with various economic sectors. The November meeting was largely devoted to examining tax issues and tax structures in the state of Kansas. And then the December meeting was focused towards getting the final information necessary to make recommendations and also making those recommendations. The one thing that I would also note, though, is that unemployment compensation issues were examined at every meeting of the committee. That has been such a contentious topic over the last 10 months and such a topic that is rapidly evolving and ripe for legislative consideration that the committee elected to review those sorts of issues at every single meeting. So just starting off with the August 12th and 13th meeting, we heard information on the specifics of the pandemic itself. We heard information concerning the state of the state budget and our taxes, information on UI. We had presentations on capital options for Kansas business, reopening the Kansas economy following the spring shutdown, and economic growth and economic development incentives and how they have interacted with that growth. From there, I'll just kind of list the sectors that we actually heard from. There is more information on who we heard from within each of these sectors and what they had to say within the report, and then obviously within the minutes of the committee. But we heard an economic overview kind of kicking off these reviews of sectors from the Kansas Chamber of Commerce and the National Federation of Independent Businesses in Kansas. And then we heard from financial services sectors, the insurance sector, the agricultural sector, oil and gas sector, the healthcare sector, real estate development, accountancy, restaurants and hospitality, and then utilities. And that kind of made up our first meeting. The second committee meeting a month later had presentations on emergency management. We heard from the Attorney General. Then we heard from the several representatives of businesses in the Kansas Society of the Kansas State chapter of the Society of Human Resource Managers, addressing some human resources issues, but also touching on unemployment compensation issues. Then we further heard from the Department of Labor on unemployment compensation issues. We had kind of a package of presentations related to childcare, education, and higher education, and specifically how those all related to workforce in Kansas, either through workforce availability or workforce development. I believe as Representative Williams mentioned in her just kind of introductory remarks, the importance of education-related issues for workforce availability in the state. We also heard a presentation from Network Kansas on certain small business support initiatives that they had undertaken in conjunction with both the Department of Commerce and also a variety of local stakeholders throughout the state. We did, of course, also hear more kind of surveying of various economic sectors throughout the state, mental health, community banks, tourism and conventions, farm winery and event venues, the diagnostic testing industry, and then representatives of the medical marijuana industry spoke to us as well. And that made up the September meeting of the committee. The November meeting of the committee largely focused on taxes and just a couple of other items, but I do want to highlight one thing that we did have the aviation manufacturing sector present and one final kind of sector overview. That was one that we had attempted to schedule earlier and actually had scheduling conflicts for each of the August and September meetings, but still wanted to make sure that didn't get missed. So I wanted to highlight that before we jumped into the rest of the November meeting. That meeting began with some information on the state of the state budget and also our revised revenue estimates. We received presentations on economic and health outcomes of various states, and especially as those correlated to the extent of the restrictive policies those states had implemented during the pandemic to date. We then discussed various issues related to property tax and property tax transparency, sales tax, and specifically sales tax of remote transactions, and income tax, and specifically the connections between Kansas's income tax and the federal income tax code. We then did just highlight various other taxes that Kansas has. There's of course a number of smaller taxes that Kansas has. We touched on two pieces of legislation from the 2020 session that had been vetoed by the governor and were not revisited by the legislature due to the end of the session. And we received a number of policy recommendations from a kind of group of business community advocates that you can see in your report. And then we all did have further update on the labor economy and unemployment compensation issues and the issues related to modernization of that system and fraudulent activity within that system throughout the pandemic. That leads me to the December 7th and 8th meeting, which was our final meeting. That meeting, we touched on employment compensation, fraud, and modernization. We received an extensive presentation from the Office of Recovery on the state's utilization of federal coronavirus relief funds. We had information concerning broadband expansion, and the Department of Commerce presented on the state's economic development outlook, kind of as we emerge from and hopefully leave behind the pandemic in the future, but hopefully sooner rather than more distant future. And from there, the committee jumped into discussion and recommendations, and this might be a convenient time to pause and see if anyone has any specific questions about the kind of committee activities before I get into the committee recommendations, as this might be a nice stopping point.
Take a drink of water while we're trying to see any questions.
I will do that.
Seeing no questions.
All right, just enough time to get a drink. so the committee made a number of recommendations, and these recommendations, I know Representative Cardwater, you and a number of other members of the committee worked to kind of group them into headings under which they might make sense together. I kind of furthered that work in the committee's report, but the reality is, of course, with a committee this broad in its scope, these recommendations extend across numerous areas, and they extend across numerous committees. I'm gonna zoom back out there, maybe. And so I'm going to try to focus on the items that maybe are more appropriate specifically for this committee, but will probably wind up hitting on of areas. And so the first area that the committee made recommendations is just kind of generally speaking on the area of government response to pandemics and just what the thinking ought to be there. And the committee's recommendations, you can see them in more detail in the report, but at a high level, they recommended that prospectively all levels of government review everything that has happened really in the past 10 months since the start of the pandemic, to kind of ensure that if something like this does happen again, that we are prepared for it, perhaps better prepared for it, or just generally prepared for it. The next recommendation regarding the response to pandemics is that the state review the Kansas Emergency Management Act and any related statutes to kind of ensure uniformity, but also maximize you all as legislative policymakers' ability to still legislate for the state, to ensure that you have appropriate oversight of any orders that are issued, whether those are restrictive or otherwise. And then the third broad recommendation that was made within there is that the committee recommends the legislature consider the issue of compensation for businesses that were shut down due to emergency management orders. And the committee kind of intentionally didn't make specific recommendations on that question, but recommended that it be reviewed, that the state consider this, and that you attempt to find a policy that is appropriate for the compensation of businesses that were shut down by the state or by local units of government. So the next set of issues that the committee made were related to the unemployment insurance, unemployment compensation system. The first of those is that the legislature consider a set of reform proposals that was proposed by conferees from the Society of Human Resource Managers. And the details on those reform proposals can of course be found in the committee minutes. I can also provide them to the committee. There may very well already be legislation related to those. I haven't seen it if it is existing, but I would expect that it might appear at some point in the session. But there were specific policy proposals from that organization and their members and the business community generally that were lumped together with that for the legislature to consider. Next, there were a number of proposals or a number of recommendations related to the modernization of the information technology systems involved in the unemployment compensation system. Generally, the committee recommended that appropriate or that sufficient funds for that modernization be appropriated by the legislature to ensure that it is taken care of and that be done this session, and also that effective staffing for that system can be financed by the Department of Labor. Further, the committee recommended that if at all possible, that the federal funds associated with the pandemic or any other relevant federal funds be used to finance that system, and also that if there are opportunities to find approaches that have been used by other states and kind of piggyback off of those as much as possible, that be done. Obviously, there are limitations to that, as every state does have their own specific UI system, but there also might be some opportunity there. And then the final, broadly speaking, set of recommendations related to modernization were that the legislature ensure that there is effective legislative oversight of these modernization efforts, making sure that everyone who uses the system, both employers and workers kind of have their voices heard in this development of this new system. There was some concern with the committee that both employers and beneficiaries of the system might be almost cut out in the development of a new modern system, and so the committee wanted to make sure that that wouldn't be the case. The next kind of set of reform proposals related to unemployment compensation related to the trust fund and its health and balances. And those recommendations were federal funds, if at all possible, and state general funds, if necessary, be used to offset trust fund losses so as to avoid the taxes that employers are required to pay going up. So basically just anything that is available to supplement the trust fund to ensure its health and ensure that the taxes that employers pay not go up be used. The committee also recommended that the state immediately reinstate the work search requirements that had been waived at the height of the pandemic, and also that the state not only do that and put only a burden on workers, but also that the state then provide workforce kind of matching services for workers to make it easier for them as they do re-engage, hopefully, into the labor force. A couple of other, in a certain sense, minor, but for anyone affected by them, they wouldn't be minor recommendations that the committee made related to the unemployment compensation system were that the legislature consider requiring income tax withholding from unemployment benefits. This is currently something that is optional within the system. It is not widely utilized, and there was a concern that the committee has, that I'm sure a number of people have, that many benefit recipients are going to be hit by an income tax bill this spring during filing season that they are not anticipating due to failing to withhold income tax from their unemployment benefits. And then the other recommendation was that the state ensure that employers who use the reimbursement side of the UI system are not charged for fraudulent claims made against them. So that kind of wraps up, broadly speaking, the unemployment compensation recommendations the committee had. Next, I'm going to highlight the regulatory recommendations. Obviously, a number of these might not exactly be this committee, but they might, but a number of them would be, and some of them might be. But generally speaking, the committee recommended that the state work to lighten the regulatory burden for businesses, and especially to avoid duplication of any regulations. And in that vein, they recommended that the state add some sort of sunset review board for recommendations. That the idea being that recommendations ought to be sunset unless we can see the public reason for those recommendations to continue to exist, and that a review board might be the best avenue to have that happen. The next recommendation was that the state consider permanently eliminating those regulations that have been temporarily waived during the pandemic, and also that the state waive any reopening sort of related regulations that might be related to businesses that were temporarily closed due to public health orders, and that the state waive any regulations or inspection requirements that they might have that would be reopening. Only if it was a situation where the business would have been open throughout the duration of that order, were it not for the order. This wasn't a call to waive all opening inspections and reopening inspections, but only those that might be related to shutdowns associated with public health orders associated with the pandemic. The third kind of category of regulatory recommendations that the committee made related to the state consider expanding reciprocity for occupational licensing. I believe that there has already been legislation introduced in both chambers related to that topic, and I think that some is already scheduled for hearing as well. That's obviously a topic that both the House and Senate are well familiar with from last legislative session. The special committee specifically recommended that last year's legislation kind of be a starting point for that legislation this year. The special committee recommended relaxing state and local permitting and any zoning regulations that might exist. And then finally, the special committee recommended that the State Department of Commerce provide services to businesses to help them navigate the regulatory climate within the state. That would be a worthwhile endeavor of the State Department of Commerce. So moving on from there to kind of the next category of recommendations within the report, those were business recruitment and economic development. Generally speaking, the committee recommended that the cost effectiveness of all economic development programs and any subsidies to businesses be evaluated. And that's true for all state and local programs or subsidies. And that the state and local governments consider replacing those programs and subsidies with perhaps more broad-based opportunities that aren't specifically tailored to individual businesses, but are rather are applicable to all businesses. The special committee recommended that the state's economic development and business development efforts be specifically targeted to emphasize the growth of startup companies within the state. And then also the committee recommended the use of the Economic Development Incentives Fund monies according to the traditional and statutorily laid out purposes of that fund, specifically noting that a legislative post-audit report last year had highlighted that some places where over the course of time the state had deviated from those traditional objectives through the appropriations process. And then within this category is also where the committee chose to kind of house recommendations that maybe didn't neatly fit into any other category related to broadband expansion, and that the state ought to continue to use federal funds towards that and other funds as necessary to expand both the access and affordability of broadband throughout the state. And then that the state ought to expand hunting and fishing opportunities throughout the state, specifically as it related to the conversations the committee had on travel and tourism, that this might be an area where the state was ripe for growth. Moving on, the next kind of category of recommendations were barriers to business entry or expansion, and the committee highlighted a few of these. It highlighted that energy cost issues might be an obstacle here, and that appropriate legislative committees should review those. It highlighted that unintended tax increases related to federal law changes might be an obstacle here, and that appropriate committees ought to review those. And then it highlighted that corporation income tax apportionment issues might be an obstacle, and that appropriate committees ought to review those and consider alternatives. Moving on, the committee recommended some workforce development items. The first of those being that the legislature ought to reconsider the aerospace and aviation tax credits that have been considered in the recent past. I believe House Bill 2118 was the source of those. The committee recommended that the state ought to evaluate what efforts other states have undertaken as it relates to aviation manufacturing development, and specifically noting that Kansas has kind of lost market share within that field in recent years, or perhaps decades is maybe a better description, and that other states seem to have a more effective approach, and Kansas ought to examine what the approach of those states have been. The committee made recommendations that apprenticeships, on-the-job training opportunities, specifically towards high-paying skilled labor industries, ought to be considered, and recommended last year's House Bill 2354 as a starting point to resolve some of the liability concerns that are currently obstacles to those. The committee made a general that the needs of workforce and labor be continued to be aligned to Kansas's K-12 and higher education systems, And then finally, the committee made a more specific recommendation related to last year's House Bill 2515, that was the Promise Scholarship Act, and that it be enacted. From there, I actually would probably maybe not go into as much specifics with these next items generally, but I will mention them. The committee made recommendations related to some banking and financial institutions legislation, specifically last year's vetoed Senate substitute for House Bill 2619. The committee made a number of property tax recommendations. The committee made a number of income tax recommendations. The committee made a sales tax recommendation. The committee made a couple of education-related recommendations. Those are one of those being closely related to workforce availability item that I mentioned earlier, and then also another one related to broadband. Just would mention that since it was something that I mentioned earlier. The committee made a couple of health policy recommendations. Then the committee did make a handful of other what might be described as non-elsewhere classified recommendations, and those you can see in the report. And so with there, I would just stop and field whatever questions anyone has. Just once again noting that this report has not yet been formally approved by the committee. That will happen at the end of this week, and that there may be a minority report to this report, but that is not yet available. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Eddie, are there any questions or clarifications for Eddie Pinner? Representative Hsu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Eddie, if you can hear me. I was just wondering, I followed the special committee from afar, but was there any talk about the recovery being asymmetric at all? I think we've all heard some stories about, some groups are recovering better than others. I just, if we're talking about solutions, I think looking deeply at the actual problems would be important.
My recollection is that did get a little bit of discussion, and it did come up occasionally. The committee did not make any recommendations specific to that discussion.
Yes, Representative. Several industries were affected more greatly than others, especially the hospitality industry, and so. That'll be, you could find that in the notes of the committee. And if you have questions on that, I'd be happy to meet with you or meet with any of the members that were on that committee. Any other questions? Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And a lot of work and a lot of different thoughts that were there. Will the Commerce Committee focus on some of the things that might work with those areas, where education might work with the Education Committee, tax would be in the Tax Committee, or will we address a number of these here?
Thanks for the question. And yeah, I probably should have said that up front. This was an Economic Recovery Committee, and so we covered from A to Z. I'm anticipating, especially the recommendations that were brushed over, they will be going to Tax Committee, and the proper committees will focus on the business stuff in here. And we're already having several of these bills drafted. Obviously, there's a back jam of it, and there's quite a bit of material here, and so hopefully we'll be able to get to it all. But we're going to prioritize the unemployment. As I said earlier, we're going to the unemployment insurance problems first, and we're going to start that next week. Any Representative Carpenter, you have a question?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the sales tax issue, could you explain to me, or someone explain to me, what the legislation requiring marketplace facilitators to collect and remit sales tax means?
Could you restate that? I didn't get it.
On the sales tax portion here, it says the committee recommends the House Committee on Taxation and Senate Committee on Assessment and Taxation at the beginning of the 2021 legislative session recommend passage of legislation requiring marketplace facilitators to collect and remit sales tax.
Eddie, do you recall who made that recommendation?
That was a recommendation that actually is related to legislation that the tax committees have considered in the past. I believe that recommendation probably Representative Gartner, I believe, made it within the committee. It, I believe, came up during the Department of Revenue's presentation on sales tax issues. The issue there relates to remote transactions, and that is kind of the Wayfair issue that is still kind of hanging out there. When an individual makes a purchase on a website like Amazon, for instance, if you make a purchase from Amazon, Amazon collects and remits sales tax on that purchase. If you make a purchase from a business that is located in a different state that doesn't otherwise have a nexus to a physical nexus to Kansas, Amazon may not collect and remit sales tax on that transaction. And so what the recommendation here is in essence recommending is a policy change that it is required to kind of capture all of that possible remote transaction revenue that would require whoever it is that is facilitating the marketplace to actually collect and remit the sales tax, even if the underlying seller and underlying buyer do not in fact do that otherwise.
Very good.
Williams.
Thank you.
Or Carpenter, sorry. Representative Johnson, that was a pretty thorough answer. Did you still want to expand on that, or you're good with that?
I'm good with that. If it's kind of hard to get your arms around, so if it made sense to Representative Carpenter, I won't add in. Otherwise, I'm glad to give a couple brief words.
Looks like it's good. Any other questions or concerns? Representative Auerkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Penner, in the conclusions and recommendations, government response to pandemics, the third paragraph, there's a mention of loss of revenue, and then there's also a mention of property taxes. Is there any mention of just loss of capital, lifelong capital investment for those individuals who basically their entire life's effort and then their business has been taken from them? Was that included in the conversation along with the revenue and the property taxes?
I'm trying to recall the exact discussion, which is of course a little challenging off the top of my head, but my recollection of the discussion specifically tended to relate more towards specifically the property taxes that those businesses had been required to pay even while they were shut down, and then the actual measurable loss of revenue to those businesses. And that might be related to kind of where that discussion evolved from within the committee. That primarily evolved from a conversation with the restaurant and hospitality industries. And as such, they were able to much more closely tie that issue to actual days that their business was closed and they could not generate revenue. If that conversation had evolved in a different manner within the committee, that it might have discussed more specifically the business capital loss. But my recollection is that based upon where that conversation came from, it was related to property tax and revenues.
Representative Auerkamp, is that you care to make a statement on it?
Mr. Chairman, thanks. I just reading that paragraph, it's been one of the more interesting things about the regulations, restrictions, mandates from the government on these business owners, essentially having their capital investment taken from them without due process, really, and their life efforts sometimes have been ripped right out of their with our hands, and I thought that's an important element of that discussion, and certainly think that it should be brought up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, yes, so we are discussing that. We didn't get quite that far in the discussion as far as capital, but I'm hoping that bill will come through Commerce and you can weigh in on it then and we can address it. Representative Clayton and then Representative Williams wanted to comment on that. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, and actually this is a question for Eddie and for you, Chairman. So as we went through the special committee and we looked at all the different impacts that occurred, not only because of the pandemic, but the response to the pandemic. And looking back from where we were to where we are now, many of us were asking for any type of data or information that helped us understand how Kansas truly has been impacted. And I know we would, love to have some information from revenue. However, that gets messy because we had $13 billion of stimulus dollars, CARES Act money that was pumped into our economy to stabilize it. So we will never know the real consequences to some of our businesses that were able to be shored up for a temporary amount of time. But I know we've asked Commerce, and I see we have David back there. I don't know if there are any updates on the number of business closures, storefronts that were closed, property tax information that may be delinquent by county through the Department of Revenue. But I think in summary to everything that we did this summer and fall, it would be great to get a picture of where we are on an economic scale so that we can better apply some solutions. And so I'll just leave that there. And I know those questions have been asked. I don't know if Eddie's gotten some more info via email or you, Chairman, but if not, if somehow we could get a summary of the economic impact, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Eddie?
Yeah, I don't have any further information that I can provide right now. I'll take a look and we'll see what we can come up with that might be responsive.
Yes, I haven't received anything either. I was anticipating that research would. We did request quite a bit of information during these meetings, and we have received almost none of it. We'll follow up with it. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so I think another good source will be the counties and maybe the Association of Counties and how their delinquencies are for property tax. And they might even be able to help or the Kansas Chamber might be able to help with that too. And I know that'd be great if you're able to get any of that. Thank you.
Any further questions? Representative Clayton. Thank you, Representative. Yes, that was anticipated, and we welcome that. Any other questions, concerns, clarifications? Okay, Eddie, thank you so much for all your work on this. I mean, this document is very inclusive and very incredible. I know you worked, as hard as the committee worked, you worked tenfold, and you are appreciated for that. Thank you for going through this today. I know you two aren't feeling very well, and that's pretty neat that you were able to do this for us. So I really appreciate you. Okay, I reviewed I think we're about done. Just want to remind the committee that tomorrow we have a hearing on the Angels bill. That's the angel investors. And so I'm also being informed on Thursday we had a hearing scheduled for the licensing bill, the reciprocity bill. and I'm told that it's not quite ready. And so we're going to move Thursday to on-call. I apologize, but we have so much to do that I was just trying to get things into the pipeline as quickly as I could. We will do something Thursday, but it'll say on-call for now. I've got a couple of things in the pipeline that I'll move up, so stay tuned. And with that, we're adjourned.